Good morning, everybody. Dr. Pete and T, and we are live. We are live on Facebook, on YouTube, and also right now on LinkedIn. Recently, we were in Bristol in the UK for a sugar intensive, and then we presented a paper at the first international conference on sugar and carb addiction. And we're getting caught up here, because in the process of our trip to the UK, both of us came down over there with COVID, and it took actually quite a bit of time for us to get back to the States, and which sort of delayed our programming and everything like that. But we want to talk, at least introduce our subject today by first talking about our experience in Bristol, which for me was utterly transformational. We spent 4 days in a sugar intensive with Bitten Jonsson, who's considered the international expert in the area of sugar and other, literally other addictions. And the reason why the addiction question is so important to us this morning, when most of the time I'm here talking about gout and the reversal of diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease, will become apparent as we go through this presentation. But I want to be certain to mention the people that have so significantly altered my life, and I'm pretty certain we're going to hear from my daughter Tanner in a second. But I am fairly certain that these individuals have altered her life as well in a very significant transformational way. So first and foremost was Bitten Jonsson. I think she's at the top of the pinnacle for experts in addiction, in particular sugar addiction. Then we have Jen Unwin from the UK, that arguably she comes from a sort of a different tangent than Bitten does. Bitten's an RN and an expert in the addiction thing, and came from that direction, and someone who had to deal with her own addictions. This is similar to my story and my daughter's story. And then we have Jen Unwin, who is a psychologist who herself struggled with sugar addiction for years and years and years, and now along with Bitten, devotes her life to helping people get through the struggle with this particular type of addiction. We also have Heidi, and I know I'm probably going to kill her last name, Gayover. My daughter Tanner may correct that in a second. I'm not sure. And then we also had Cynthia Myers Morrison, and we should really talk about her because she's another individual. And this is the thing that you'll find is so common in the space that we're all in, where we're trying to help people reverse chronic diseases. And again, Cynthia's story is very similar to the rest of us. She was struggling with addictions too. And since she has become an expert in the diagnosis of sugar addiction, and she had a major influence on me for sure. Tanner may speak about that as well. And then we had Evelyn Borda Roy. I probably killed her name too. She's a Canadian general practitioner who is kicking butt in the reversal of diabetes. And like me, realized when she got into that business that there was this underlying problem in trying to get her patients to be compliant with the low carb lifestyle, right? And what she found, and what I have found too, and this has a lot to do with me getting to where I'm sitting today talking to you, is realizing with our own clients that reversing these chronic diseases is really actually pretty easy if you're compliant with the lifestyle. But the problem is the cravings and the drive in these individuals to go back to eating carbohydrates, to go back to eating the sugar. And there's a relationship to alcohol here too that we'll get into today. But let me turn this over now to Tanner, and she can give us some of our impressions about the whole Bristol, UK experience.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We are very happy to be back in the US, but at the same time, I have to say it was also bittersweet because the experience we had was absolutely incredible. The people we met, uh, the it, the drive. I want to say the group of people that came together to realize that we have a problem in this world with sugar, right? I mean, sugar and carbs. I think sugar is the underlying thing here, right? Um, and just being surrounded by that many people, and I mean, there was a room at the first international food sugar and food addiction conference. It was a full room full of people from all over that came to listen to us speak and other speakers, and it was just such an incredible experience. And then, of course, with the 4 day sugar intensive with Bitten Jonsson, and she's one of my mentors. I absolutely adore her knowledge, um, as well as Jen Unwin, and then Heidi. I am also going to murder her last name. So they were incredible hosts and facilitators, and just the movement, the energy that really flowed through the sugar intensive was amazing. As well as Cynthia Morrison Myers. She is somebody who reminds me a lot of myself. She is super fun. She's so personable. She has flamboyant red hair and just is just an amazing individual to be at the conference. And not only that, but she has overcome a copious amount of addiction. Um, with the underlying food and sugar addiction being the main one. One of my biggest takeaways from Bristol is there's a lot of people in the sugar intensive, okay, and everybody's there for different reasons, whether it be some individuals with alcohol or some individuals with drugs or some individuals with food addiction. The one common conclusion that everybody came down to, and the reason why we were all sitting in that room, is what is the gateway drug? What is a gateway drug that we've all had from the start of when we were children, that could affect us in the future? And it comes down to sugar, 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 sugar. And as what you'll hear from Bitten, you'll hear from Cynthia, you'll hear from Jen and Heidi, and any other person that was in that room, that sugar has been the biggest and hardest thing that they've ever had to give up. And that was the root of a lot of the other addictions that they had that started them on this road to recovery, is what I want to say. So I have to say the experience in Bristol was something that I wish I could be back in that room for another 4 days, learning and meeting and speaking to everybody and all the people and all the clients that showed up, and hear their stories and their journeys again. So hopefully we can shed light a little bit today and talk about, our presentation, kind of what we talked about in our presentation, as well as, we're going to have some more takeaways for you guys, because this was a really, really big deal. It was amazing. And I wish I could be there right now in the room again, not with COVID.
Yeah, we could pass on the COVID. So we could pass on that aspect of our trip, but it in no way does it even hold a candle to the experience that we had in the sugar intensive. I can say that it definitely changed my life. So here's the structure of our presentation today. We are going to talk about the science first, and I get criticized for this, right? Dr. Pete, why do we care, and why do we need to know about the science, right? Because it's complicated. It hurts our brain to think about it. But here's the number one reason why this is so important. And that reason is that sugar addiction, alcohol, and the other addictions that can follow from those are a brain disease. This is a brain disease. This is not your fault. And we're first going to talk about the science of this, because I believe that the biochemical driver that is integrated with the brain and the brain signaling is something that we evolved into as humans about 24 million years ago. And we need to talk about that. If you're listening to me right now and you have issues with sugar, if you're a gout sufferer, all right, sugar and alcohol, the number one drivers. Now, am I saying that there aren't other things that are involved in gout? No, I'm not saying that at all. But I'm fairly confident we know the number one and the two main drivers, the alcohol and the sugar. We know that. And so for a gout sufferer, as example, those have to be eliminated. Now, if you have an addiction, that process is going to be more difficult for you than it would be somebody who's not addicted, right? And the same goes when we talk about the diabetes, the obesity, and the cardiovascular disease, because all of those, if you want to reverse them without going down the medical track of medications and whatnot, then the low carb environment is a solution, and you can rapidly reverse these conditions. It can take time, more time, the more entrenched you are in a particular chronic disease, but they can be reversible to a large extent by going low carb. What's the obstacle? The obstacle is you've got to give up the sugar, and some of us are drinking alcohol on top of the sugar, and both of those are going to have to go. So let's go ahead and dive into. Okay, wait. See, I'm going too fast already. So firstly, we're going to deal with the science. Then we're going to talk about how we can apply that knowledge to ending our addiction, to reversing, to putting gout in remission, to reversing diabetes, and so on. What the plan is there. And then I'm going to turn the talk over to Tanner, and we are going to hear from a colleague, Tia, who's going to talk to us about, we're going to hear her story so that we fully understand why we're doing this. All right. And then we're going to hear from a client whose name needs to remain anonymous. And he's going to talk to us about what the biggest factors are in actually walking down the road of recovery. What are the greatest needs to the people that are doing this? All right. And the reason he is so relevant is because we're talking about serious type 2 diabetes, and we're talking about binge eating, and we're talking about serious addiction to sugar. And we're going to hear from him how the most important aspects of his recovery. All right. So let's go ahead and start with the science. T, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I don't. I think that first, I'm really excited to hear from Tia, and I'm also really excited to hear from our client, because I think both sides that you're not sides, but both stories that you're going to hear are so relevant. And after going to the sugar intensive and really seeing and listening to the stories, a lot of people are suffering with this illness, and it's time that I say we join the revolution, right? It's time. I'm so excited to hear from them, and I'm really excited to get the revolution started, because it's time to change the way that we're eating and the food that we're given. So I'm really excited to get into the science. Let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, so first and foremost, the way I think about this, when I was first confronted with this issue, working with in two areas, myself and dealing with the cravings that I had when I started the ketogenic diet nearly 4 years ago, and my struggle with alcohol. Those two things were very difficult for me to give up. So I started thinking about, what do we need to have an addiction? And as a biochemist, a PhD biochemist, there were three things. The first was, I figured there has to be a biochemical driver for this, because you're putting things into your mouth. The human body must be able to sense what that is. And then we have to have some kind of secondary. And when I say secondary, I'm not prioritizing this. We need a biochemical driver. We need a signaling mechanism so that the information that is coming in from the mouth and then the gut and so on, I'm going to get into more detail on that in a second, is then taking that information and signaling it to the brain. And then we have the food reward system uh, which is actually well defined at this point in the brain itself. I believe we need all three of those linked together. So where is the biochemical driver? Well, there's actually decades of work from Dr. Richard Johnson's laboratory and somewhere north of 700 papers that have been published in this area. And the slide that you're looking at right now is called the survival switch. And he talks about this a lot in his most recent book. And there are, like I said, hundreds of publications here. I am just citing the book because it's a really good source to go to in terms of layman's language and whatnot. And that would be Nature Wants Us to Be Fat, that was published this year. And I would encourage you after this talk today, if you're interested in what T and I are going to be discussing here and you want to see sources yourself, his book is a great place to go because you also get all the references there. So you can backtrack into the primary literature if you want. So we're looking at fructose metabolism here, and there are really three components to this. We have, because in the standard American diet, we have people that are eating 5 to 6 standard American meals every single day. Those meals tend to be hyperglycemic, so they have high degrees of glucose in them. They tend to have added sugar, which the sugar itself is a combination of glucose and fructose. And the fructose metabolism, as we get into this, is really the defining thing here. It is the biochemical driver. We'll talk about the signaling involved in this in a few minutes. Alcohol and the hyperglycemia play into this pathway through another biochemical pathway that is called the polyol pathway. Alcohol and hyperglycemia activates the first enzyme in this process, which is called aldose reductase. So you get this fructose load coming into the liver. We're going to focus on the liver, although I want the listeners to understand that this pathway is now been shown to exist and uber functional, with uber functionality in the brain, liver, adipose tissue, skeletal tissue, in the intestines, right? We're going to be talking about the intestines, in the kidneys, and also in the chondrocyte, which is the biologically important cell that we find in the joints. And for the gout sufferers out there, I believe we have a combination of three things there: the uric acid, the chondrocyte, and the innate immune system that are involved in a gout flare. So we have fructose metabolism. I'm going to go ahead and assert essentially everywhere where it's been looked at in humans so far, when that tissue and the experiments necessary to find that metabolism are looked for. This pathway evolved in humans 24 million years ago through a mutation that blocked an enzyme called uricase, which meant that in humans, that through this pathway, we could have a sudden acute rise in uric acid within the cell, intracellular uric acid. And that intracellular uric acid, caused by the arrival of a high fructose load, and I call this the deadly triad. Most of the time, this is going to happen at a standard American dinner meal, which is most likely place where an adult is going to be drinking alcohol, along with a plate of food that will be very high in glycemia, in glucose. And in terms of processed food, and usually the sauces that are on the food on that plate will also have a high fructose load. And this is one of the key things. I've had a lot of questions rolling in on our YouTube channel about this pathway. And one of the things that gets overlooked is this concept where we have large quantities of glucose, alcohol, and fructose showing up at the liver in a relatively short time frame, which has the tendency to activate this pathway. And once this pathway is activated, there are three things that are going to happen. First, the energy budget of the liver or any place this is happening. And folks, this is happening in the brain. Keep that in the back of your mind. This is happening in the brain. So number one, the ATP, which is, you can think of as biochemical dollars. It's the money that our cells use to do things. I'm burning ATP right now in order to talk to you, right? It's the energy currency of the cell. And when we activate this pathway, this driver, the ATP concentrations in the liver plummet. We lose phosphate, plummets, and we have this sudden acute rise in uric acid, which is driving systemic inflammation, mitochondrial reprogramming. The mitochondria stops producing energy, and the liver flips over to a complete storage mode. So we have de novo lipogenesis. In English, what that means is that the liver is going to start producing fat. And that fat is going to show up as oil droplets in the liver, and it's also going to be transported out into the circulatory system, where it's going to arrive, for example, at the adipose cells, and then it's going to be stored as fat there. This is the dominant reason why people are gaining weight on the standard American diet. And for those of us where this pathway is super sensitive, this is the reason why your weight literally just seems to balloon when you start hitting the sugar really, really hard, because you're super activating this pathway. We also see the downregulation of nitric oxide, which has serious implications for driving cardiovascular disease. Now, before I start moving to how this pathway is driving the addictive process to sugar, I want to point out some statistics. For a gout sufferer, and this is another thing that we've been getting a lot of questions about, you must remember that gout is not an individual ailment that is being caused by the input of sugar or the ingestion of sugar. It is an outcome along with a bunch of other chronic ailments. So if you've been diagnosed with gout and you're my age, you're like in your 60s, 74% of us have defects in our 70%, have defects in our kidneys that most likely are being driven by this fructose metabolism. 74% of us have high blood pressure. A full quarter of us are suffering from diabetes. A significant portion also are suffering from cardiovascular disease. So the issue of stopping the sugar and pushing back against activating this pathway is super important to gout sufferers, because we need to stop the activation of the pathway in order to reverse these conditions. So if you're a gout sufferer, the likelihood that you're not suffering from another aspect of chronic disease is really small. Now, if I give you some other statistics, and these are also important, 52% of the individuals out there that are my age have been diagnosed with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, right? This is a really big deal in terms of this major driver. And if I just go back for a minute, some people are going to look at this and they're going to ask the question, well, where's the insulin resistance, right? This is the thing that everyone has heard about, the insulin resistance. Well, that systemic inflammation you're looking at right there, and we don't have the time right now in this presentation to go into this, but there's at least four, there are at least four major mechanisms where this driver is leading to insulin resistance. Mechanistically, and also hepatic insulin resistance that Dr. Lustig has talked about, where gluconeogenesis, as an example, in the liver and glycogenolysis are not shut down. So at the same time frame, you have this hyperglycemic event going on in the standard American meal with the alcohol and the fructose. You also have a situation where the liver is feeding glucose literally back into the circulatory system. So it's not rocket scientist to realize you have the glucose that's coming in from the meal, and you also have glucose that's entering the circulatory system from the liver. And what is the pancreas doing? Churning out the insulin to respond to that. What's the point of this slide? To realize that more than likely, if you have a sugar addiction and you're down the road in age, like someone like me, the likelihood that you're not suffering from another chronic ailment is actually pretty slim. This just shows the outcome from this biochemical driver, the fructose metabolism that now Jonsson is calling the survival switch, is a massive constellation of issues. The diabetes, the obesity, fatty liver, Alzheimer's disease is involved in this. Don't forget, in the brain, you have this fructose metabolism going on, cardiovascular disease, and now I have added the sugar and alcohol addiction, because somebody that is eating this way chronically has the likelihood of developing these behavioral problems. And now let's get to the signaling. So here what I'm doing is I am splitting up the effects, the biochemical effects that we now know to exist. I've already talked about the stuff on the left side of the slide. We know that when the switch is activated, that we're generating the insulin resistance, the increased blood pressure, inflammation, downregulation of nitric oxide. And Jonsson has shown this in animal studies, we know that when the switch is activated, also I think that there's some human studies on this too, but we know that activation of the switch drives hunger. It also increases food intake. What do I mean by that? You take two people and you sit them down side by side. You give somebody a plate, a ketogenic plate, a well done, nutritionally functional ketogenic plate. And you give the other person the standard American meal. And they're allowed to eat what they want. They eat to their fill. And what you're going to see is the person eating the standard American plate is actually going to ingest more calories. Activation of the switch drives hunger. There's an increase in the intake of food. There is a development of preference for sugar. And in terms of the components of sugar, the glucose and the fructose, the preference for fructose is greater than the preference for glucose. And remember where we find fructose. We find it in table sugar. We find it in high fructose corn syrups at 55%. We find it in agave syrups at 90% or higher. And we find it in processed food, which literally comprises between 70 to 74%, depending on who you read, in the aisles of the supermarket, basically in anything that comes to you in a bottle or a packaging or anything along those lines. You're going to find a high fructose component in the added sugars that are there. Now, so I hope I've convinced you about the biochemical driver. We have this driver that literally loves fructose, and it is functional on glucose. And on top of it, alcohol feeds in the glucose and the alcohol via polyol pathway. So where's the signaling? So it turns out that the driver, the biochemical driver that I'm talking about, is linked to the brain in three fundamental ways. Through taste, we have sweet taste receptors, sour receptors. We have the umami receptors that are sensitive to the taste that come from like monosodium glutamate, or that sort of rich taste you get when you take a bite of a dark red meats and so on. Those taste buds are involved in signaling directly to the brain, especially the sweet taste buds, which have a preference, again, you guessed it, for fructose. Additionally, these taste receptors tend to drive intake, right? So once the taste receptor knows you've got fructose coming in, it's signaling to the brain, okay, this is awesome, and we want more of it. Let's keep eating it. we have metabolic aspects of this. So when these substances are being processed in the liver, there is signaling to the brain. And again, the issue of the preference. When we shift to the gut signaling is actually, I find, the most amazing of this whole signaling process, because in the gut, we have there's taste receptors there. And so, think about what that means, people. It means that in the gut lining itself, that there are sweet receptors that have preference for the fructose and the glucose and can tell the difference between them. There's metabolic aspects of this, all right, that involve signaling directly to the brain, because the gut, it metabolizes fructose of all things, right? It metabolizes it. So again, think about the brain, the liver, the intestines here, and so on. This is actually a really big deal. And those of you thinking about the kidney damage, the gout people, right, that are thinking, do I have kidney damage? And how could that happen? Because the kidney is metabolizing fructose in the proximal tubes, which can lead to the kidney damage and the excretion of the uric acid that's arriving there. So we have very strong gut signaling with the brain. Now, this is a very idealized illustration of the brain, and I'm going to keep things simple. What I do want to say here, and just forgive me for this, just forgive me because I forgot. I'm going to leave here for a bright second. Okay, in terms of the brain signaling, you can get this book that was edited by mainly from Joan Eifland, who's an very experienced practitioner in the area of food addiction. Why am I bringing that up? Because the brain signaling, the food reward system is really well characterized. Does that mean that the last answer in this has been sorted out? No, not by any stretch of the imagination. But there's really strong data for the food reward system and the concept that all addictions, like when we move from sugar and alcohol to things like cocaine and heroin, that those addictions have piggybacked on this food reward system, that most likely we evolved starting with this biochemical driver and then the signaling functions leading to the hardwiring and the communication between the different regions in the brain that kept us programmed as we were hunter-gatherers, right? Moving from one food source to the next, which food sources were so important for us. And when we sat down and we came upon a food source and then we ate it, in particular the fruits and the honey that we encountered in the places that we went, we were driven to sit there and eat tons of it, develop the fat to store these calories, right? Because when we moved from that food source to the next one, we had to be able to functionally burn those calories to get from point A to point B, wherever the next food source happened to be. Now, where the problem lies with this is when you're chronically activating this pathway, the survival pathway, because in most cases in the standard American diet, this pathway is being activated 24 hours a day. This pathway was never meant to function that way. So let's quickly talk about what's happening with the brain then in a very idealized format. So in the upper left-hand corner, we have the prefrontal cortex, and this is mainly keeping our attention on the thing that we're eating at that moment that we like so much, right? So we're focused. It keeps us focused on that plate of food. And then we move down to the nucleus accumbens, where we're being driven, the motor skills to shovel that food into our mouth. It is being driven when we shift down and right to the amygdala. This is going, oh my God, I am so in love with this food, right? And I'm loving this experience. I just need to keep having it, right? And then we move to the hippocampus, which is taking in all the sensory information about this environment so that we can find our way back to that environment so we can relive this experience. And we are talking about the dopamine system here, which also comes to us with the deficits, right? So that in order to have this experience again, we're going to have to actually eat more of what it is we're eating. Okay, so to summarize this, we have our biochemical survival switch, which is tightly linked through signaling that is through taste, metabolic, the actual breakdown of components, and through the gut-brain signaling. And then we have the brain, which is bringing that in, taking that information and driving the circuit that is essentially driving our hunger, the food intake, and et cetera down the road. When this is being chronically established over and over and over again, starting with our children eating the sugar, then eventually this can lead to behavioral disorders. And this is summed up very nicely by Richard Jonsson. This quote here: recall that the major action of this biochemical driver was to keep us from starving to death, right? It allowed us a way to very quickly build energy, right? To store fat that we then burned as we move from one food source to the next. The problem is with this, if we're chronically activating this source, is that over and over again, every single day, 24 hours a day, week after week, month after month, and year after year, this can drive behavioral disorders, sugar addiction. So now we're going to turn to the application. What do we need to do? Well, hopefully you can see that number one, we need to stop the biochemical driver. That requires giving sugar up, giving alcohol up, and lowering the carbs. We need to reduce the probability of a hyperglycemic event. We need to kill the deadly triad. We need to stop the fructose. We need to stop the hyperglycemia, and we need to stop the alcohol. Then we're also going to cut into the carbs. And the reason we want to do that is we want to stabilize our glucose. And the reason we want to stabilize the glucose is because we want to normalize the expression of our insulin. Why do we want to do that? Because we need to normalize our hunger and satiation hormones. We don't want to be abnormally hungry, which happens when we're driving this switch, right? If we're doing the fructose, for example, and we're driving this switch, then we're going to be overly hungry almost all the time. And this drives the food intake and so on down the road. So we need to stabilize appetite. Going low carb also means that we are going to optimize our body composition. Why is this an issue? Because there are many of us out there that suffer from body image problems, significantly overweight. We have issues when we look in the mirror and all this. And a lot of us out there that suffer from sugar addiction have been going through this for a really long time, yo-yo dieting and doing whatever they can to trying to get the weight down. And then, right, the cravings come back and they're back into the sugar, the weight comes back up. In this lifestyle, when we normalize the hunger satiation hormones, generally in the first year, if someone is compliant in the low carb lifestyle, they're going to basically lose about 12% body weight, and body composition really comes to fruition. You look great, you feel great, right? You're going to be able to get into those slacks, for example, that have been hanging in your closet for a couple of decades, and so on. We reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. All markers of cardiovascular disease tend to get better on the low carb lifestyle. And then lastly, and this is very important, maybe it should have been number one, is that when we go low carb and we become fat burning, we produce a collection of small molecules called ketones. And one of the most important of that class of molecules is beta hydroxybutyrate. Not only does it serve as an energy source for the brain, yes, people, The brain does burn glucose, but in a fat burning mode, it burns ketones. It burns beta hydroxybutyrate as one of those molecules to produce energy. But an advantage to this is it also enhances the production of GABA, which is gamma amino butyric acid. And GABA is beautiful to have enhanced in your brain because it softens the urges that you're going to have when you shift into this lifestyle. It's going to soften the urges to go back to sugar. And we want to have softening of those urges. Okay, so with this, I am now going to turn the rest of the presentation over to Tanner.
All right. So the first thing that we want to show with this this video is we're going to show the why we do this lifestyle. Tia Reed, another mentor of mine, one of our colleagues, just an amazing person in general, is going to tell her story. Her story is not only moving, it makes me tear up, but she's the definition of why everybody was in that room, right? And why whoever's listening, why you guys are here is because we are suffering from addiction and you can do something about it. So let's go ahead and get started with Tia.
Staying true to yourself. What has been your greatest challenge staying true to yourself in the keto lifestyle and the effort to reverse your diabetes?
Well, hi, Pete, and thank you for talking with me today. I've been looking forward to it. But to answer your question, once I truly understood that type 2 diabetes was a carbohydrate substance abuse problem, and then in fact, I had an addiction to sugar, the same as alcohol to an alcoholic or drugs to a drug addict, I finally had a diagnosis. So I had hope. And I knew others had battled their addictions and won, and I was going to try to give it all I got. I had been told repeatedly by the medical community that it was just the cards I had been dealt. There was not much I could do other than eat less and move more. You know, I tried countless diets, even tried excessively exercising, walking 6 and 7 miles a day. I walked into work. I mean, I wanted so much to eliminate over 20 medications and stop using the insulin pump that was hooked to my body because, I mean, I had to unhook it in the shower. I had to swim. If I wanted to swim, I could only go a few minutes. Even if I wanted to have sex, I had to worry about that insulin pump and the site. And would it work again? Was I going to have to stick it back in there? Was I going to have to pay for another, thing to put it in? And all the medications and doctor's appointments just drained me financially. I felt like giving up. I felt no desire to go out with my friends or, pictures were taken at an event. I would hide behind somebody. I couldn't even I had to muster up enough strength just to go to work in the morning and come home and I would lay down right away. I've been going to diabetic educators for years, doing exactly what I was told, measuring all my food, counting calories, eating the 46 grams of carbs a meal 3 times a day, eating 2 snacks twice a day at 15 grams a piece. I just never wanted to go out to eat. It was just a hassle. It was embarrassing. I had to ask for all these things and measurements and all that. And I just got sicker and sicker. And not only that, but my marriage was suffering and I was worried I wasn't going to have any friends left. Or worse, that I, was going to lose a leg or not be able to see. And I'm sorry, but I talk about it. It brings all those feelings back up. The low carb, high fat, carnivore changed my life.
I think that her story is absolutely incredible. And I want everybody to kind of take a second and really sit on that because she's changed her life. She's off of 22 medications, with metformin being her last. So if you can, give a silent round of applause, because that's an incredible accomplishment. So we just heard the why we do this lifestyle. Next, our client is going to describe how we do this lifestyle and what support systems and coaching make it possible.
Worst. When are the urges to eat sugar and carbs the worst?
The urges hit the hardest in the evenings or in social situations. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of triggers in addition to those. So billboards, memories, anything that the smells that hit. But usually the evenings, the afternoons, I find the afternoons are when I struggle the biggest with the urges, and that's when they start to cement. So if I can keep them from cementing in the afternoons, usually the evenings are much more successful. If they start to cement in my brain and I start to put a plan together, which usually takes a couple seconds. So from the time the urge hits the brain, if I take that urge and let it sit for more than a couple seconds rather than let it pass through, that's usually when I know I'll have a binge eating episode that evening. And my binges are 4,000 to 5,000 calories, usually highly palatable sugary items.
And what type of support works the best to help you overcome the drive to eat carbs?
In my situation, the coach relationship's paramount. I can't do it with just leaning on my family, right? My family doesn't necessarily agree with the ketogenic lifestyle. And I need someone that's not only expert in the ketogenic lifestyle, but living it and facing the same challenges that I'm facing. And there's two things that I really need from a coach. One is accountability. I have to have a platform where my numbers are tracked and I can be accountable for my progress or lack thereof. And then the second thing I need from my coach is accessibility. I do need to have some quick response time in the very moment of my struggles.
What single thing would you add to your support program that you don't have now?
I do feel like these support groups, these anonymous groups where you're able to share struggles and successes in a group setting is a very smart thing that the anonymous groups have come up with that I think we need to see transcend that barrier into the ketogenic lifestyle for those who do need to lean on a support group.
All right, and as you can see, our client's road to recovery has been absolutely incredible. In 2020, his fasting glucose was at 141, and in 2021, it dropped to 93. His A1C has gone from a type 2 diabetic range of a 6.7 down to a pre-diabetic range of 5.8. So this is incredible. We're still working specifically with this client on the road to recovery. So figuring out the sugar addiction aspect specifically, but he's come an incredibly long way, and I'm really, really, really proud of him. It's a challenge.
So to summarize, basically, and T, you probably have some other thoughts about this, but he talked about monitoring his numbers, and abstinence from sugar is one of the aspects of this. But the other aspect of this is that the recovery for a particular individual is going to be just that, individualized. And he talked about monitoring numbers and biomarkers and things like that. And we do suggest tracking those, but on an individual basis, those biomarkers can be triggering, right? So my only point is that in recovery, the recovery itself is also going to be individualized for that particular person. And
Yes.
And we did address weight and body composition here, so I want to clarify that too. Some people are really going to have an issue with scales, and so throw it out. We don't need the scale. As you progress into this one thing that you could do actually is just use a measuring tape and do your circumference right around over the top of your belly button. Over time, you're going to see that change, right? And additionally to that, you can do the slack test, right? Your slacks, because there will be slacks that you're going to be able to wear that you couldn't before. And so maybe that's the best way to think about body composition. So I just want to clarify that recovery from sugar and alcohol addiction has to be, there are some fundamental principles. One of those is the abstinence issue. We believe in that. You just got it. You have to stop with it. There's no moderation in an addiction, right? You're not, you wouldn't think with an alcoholic in terms of alcohol that a few weeks into recovery, it would be okay to do a shot, just one shot, right? What's the likelihood of that working? Probably not too good. So this idea that you can, with sugar addiction, that you can just have a little bit is equally a problem. So the whole point being that in terms of recovery, that there has to be an individualized program. And I think biomarkers are important, but tailoring that to the individual, what they're comfortable with and what is not triggering. T, what do you think?
I'm going to jump into, because I think the one thing we're saying is, yes, we have to absolutely abstinence, right? Cut out the carbs, sugar. I'm going to say sugar because Bitten says the actual sugar addiction, right? And the carbs, obviously, but I'm going to say sugar right now. So obviously we have to cut out the carbs. I mean, that is, and sugar, that is point blank, period. Okay. One thing that we need to talk about is that the road to recovery is not easy. Okay. I'm a nicotine addict, which I think is actually a very difficult drug to quit. And during our sugar addiction intensive, I could relate a lot of my symptoms and experiences with nicotine to obviously with sugar. One of them being is that I started smoking vape. I started vaping when I was 22. I'm 27 now, and I quit a year ago, March of 2021. I had tried to quit multiple times before that. And it was really, 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 really hard for me to do. So I think the one thing that that our client mentioned, right, specifically, is I can cut out, let's say I can cut out nicotine for, 2 weeks at a time, and I can feel better, right? But then there's that, if we can go back to the brain picture that my dad just went over, right? There's that, let's wait to go back there if we can, just really quick, because I think I want to explain this a little bit better. There we go. Okay, so when in the midst of my nicotine addiction, I could put down my vape pen for a week or 2 weeks, right? But then I go through and I have this signaling in my brain, right? And this is exactly what happens. And then all of a sudden, I can't put it down and I'm back to vaping again. This is the exact same thing that happens with sugar addiction, as we just went over. It's the same thing that happens with alcohol addiction. And the thing that we really need to talk about is that aspect of recovery, because we can be abstinent, right? And then we pick something up. I'm going to be always a recovering nicotine addict. I mean, if I pick up a cigarette or a vape again, I am right back to where I started. And it took me when I first picked up after quitting for 5 months, I told myself, you know what, T, you'll be fine. You'll be able to quit again. No big deal. It took me 2 years to quit. So I really want you to think about that. It took me 2 years to put down my vape pen again. So it is not easy to recover from an addiction. It is very difficult. I was really hard on myself. I had so much shame, which is something we really went over in the addiction intensive, right? My dad didn't even know I was vaping because I was so ashamed of myself that this is something that I would even do, that I was like, killing my lungs and potentially killing my body. But that was something that really prevented me from coming forward. So the road to recovery is really, really important. And having those support groups, as we just went over, and coaching is crucial, because
I also think besides the support groups and the coaching is also having a group of significant others. I mean, like close friends, other people that know the process you're going through, so that you can pick up a phone, or these days you literally can pick up a phone and make a text or whatever. And something that we didn't get into here is the red dog, blue dog way of looking at this, right? The red dog being the addiction, and that's what you're talking about.
Yes.
You're talking about the red dog coming back on you and going, all right, it's okay to just have a little. Just go ahead and go vape a little. In my case, late afternoon, it's okay. You can have you haven't had any beer for weeks. You can, what's the big thing? Have one beer, right? And then we have the blue dog, which is coming from a place of love, right? Deeply within us, and logic and common sense that is pushing back against the red dog. And we need the power of the dog. We need power of the blue dog. That's what we need, right?
And we need to feed, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And what you're talking about is so important, having the support group, the coaching, and this ring of friends that you can text anytime to try and get to shift that power struggle from the red dog to the blue dog, where the blue dog puts the red dog down and we get through another day.
And I think when we talk about the group of friends, I think that that's also really important to talk about, because to be honest, I think when we find that group of people that we want to text about, trying to recover from, in my case, I'm going to say vaping, all my close friends were vaping. So that group of people wasn't for me to message, right? It wasn't for me to say, hey guys, like I'm really struggling, like vaping. What do I do? Well, just do it. Why not? Like you can quit tomorrow, right? So when we talk about a group of people that you can message, that you can talk to about this, we're talking about somebody who understands the difficulty of what you're going through. Because I'm sorry, and I'm gonna say it, this ish isn't easy. So when we talk about, the red dog, one thing that I learned, and this has actually worked for me in quitting my nicotine addiction, which I did cold turkey, which is very hard to do. I actually don't recommend it because it's mentally very, very difficult. If you can, that's awesome. I wish I would have reached out to people so that I could have overcome this, as a group and had the support. But one thing I learned, and also something that Bitten Jonsson said during our sugar intensive, is someone asked, how do I do this? What do I do when I have these cravings and my red dog is coming up? Oh, just have another one. Just have a little bit more. It's going to be fine. Just say not today. I mean, don't even put the fact, when we think about recovery, okay, we don't say 20 years from now, okay, just not today. Just take it literally one day at a time. And that's what I had to do with quitting my severe nicotine addiction, was not today, T. You know what? If you wake up in the morning and you still feel like absolute utter crap, we'll think about it tomorrow. And that is literally what got me through being able to stay abstinent of nicotine for the past year and 2 months. So
yeah, so taking each day one at a time.
Yes.
When the red dog starts hitting you with it, going, you know what, red dog, that sounds like such a great idea, but we're not doing that today.
Mm-hmm.
And then start texting a friend. Have strategies to work backwards. And then I want to make sure everyone understands the connection that you made here, T, with this diagram that we have up, or the schematic that we have up. So my contention is we have this biochemical driver that was evolved in humans, that has strong signaling to the brain, that evolved into this food reward pathway. And these other drugs, the nicotine, the alcohol evolved onto this pathway, cocaine, heroin, all of that stuff is piggybacked on this system. And that's why all of these things are related, right?
Yes.
So what we're talking about today is it's not a one-off. It's not just about the sugar. And many would argue, including Bitten Jonsson, that sugar is the gateway.
Yes, and I agree with that. And actually, when we were at the intensive, there were so many other individuals who also agreed with that sugar was the gateway to the beginning of their, long stream of addiction. So what I want to say is, again, when we talk about the red dog and the blue dog, you have, when we say, I'm going to reference myself, okay? When I make a decision, I always have, okay, well, if you do it this way, why don't you just pick up again? Like, it's your stress level is going to be a little bit better. That's the red dog. Okay. The blue dog is, well, T, you've been nicotine free for 1 year and 2 months, and like, you feel the best that you've ever felt. And I know you're stressed out right now, but that if you do that, like, don't do that. When we talk about the red dog and the blue dog, we talk about feeding the blue dog. We want to feed that side of us that makes us feel really good, which is the blue dog. We want to support the blue dog. And by doing that, be kind to yourself, because addiction recovery is very difficult. Reach out to.
Basically, when that blue dog starts to talk, right?
Yes.
That's where you need a toolbox of some strategies. Maybe it's time to get up and go for a walk, or maybe it's time to have some water with some GABA in it, or something like that, or some sort of alternative, perhaps some exercise or a meditation or your favorite music, something to yield power to the blue dog, right? And overcome that urge, the red dog, to go down the pathway again. But T, we're right at 1 hour. So,
Okay.
So we should close out. How would you summarize what are your thoughts about that?
Well, so just let me quickly, because I was just about to do that. But okay, so the things I was just going to say is, for me to summarize this process, is number 1, feed the blue dog. Number 2, be kind to yourself. Number 3, reach out for help and get support. And I'm going to end it by saying we have a support group. It is free. It's not, charged or anything like that. We would love for you to join and be a part, because it is a support group encouraging road to recovery, honestly. So if you're interested, please reach out to us, and we will definitely, it's on Mondays at 5:00 Arizona time. And we want you to be a part of that, because this is possible with support, with encouragement, and with feeding the blue dog. So that's kind of what I want to summarize. Again, Bristol was absolutely incredible. I loved the trip I had with my dad. We had an amazing 2 weeks together with a couple days of COVID and some rescheduling flights, but we made it back, and it was awesome. So please reach out to us for that support group if you guys are interested.
Okay, and I will close this out. The one thing I want to say, remember, this is the way I got into this area of thinking, was because I saw, when I switched to the ketogenic diet, the amount of resistance that I had doing that, right? The cravings for the beer were still there, and for chocolate in my case. And then I also saw it with our clients, right? The blue dog in the clients going, yeah, I want to reverse my diabetes, or whatever the metabolic derangement was, right? But the act of doing that, bringing the sugar down, alcohol down, cutting into the carbs, became problematic because of the reluctance, one way or the other, however you want to describe it, of those substances coming back into their life. And somebody trying to reverse diabetes, but eating sugar every day, is not going to get there, right? Because it's actually, this driver is driving the insulin resistance, which is driving the diabetes, right? So the driver has to be shut down. The key thing, stop the signaling to the brain. And then the brain has been wired. This is a brain disease. It takes time to fix that. We need new wiring. So the road to recovery is achieving that from the point of view of a metabolic level, and having the brain over time rewire in the healthy lifestyle that you then have. So we would like to thank everyone for listening. Any last quick comment, T?
No, I just want to thank everybody for listening, and you can do this.
Okay. And we have links in the show notes on our, where this video, you'll find this video on our YouTube channel, Dr. Pete's Keto Club, and all the show notes and the links, our Discord link is there if you're interested in a online course in terms of gout remission. Is really, really high quality. We have the link for that there. Also, there is a 50% discount code for that. And you guys have a really great day. Go ahead, T.
No, and I just want to say too, like if everybody, and I don't want to keep this long, but if anybody is over having issues and needing coaching, please reach out to us and let's schedule something so we can sit down and figure out how we can help you. Honestly, I think that's something. Let's figure out how we can help you.
All right, everyone have
Thank you, everyone.
a great day. Thanks for being here.